I have written 2 plays, and I'm working on another one right now, literally right now. Yeah, so I wrote those through at my school, Harvard Westlake. We have a playwrights festival, and it's a program of the school, and essentially what you do is over, I think like I think it's like over 5 or 6 months. You essentially, anyone can participate, and what you do is you write a one-act play, which is like pretty short, like 10 to like 20 minutes long, and then you have a mentor as well, who you can like ask for advice, either like a teacher, like a professional like playwright or writer, and over those 5 months you write this play, and then they're taken to like a committee who like picks like about 12 to be produced on one of the school stages with student actors and professional directors. It's an amazing opportunity. Yeah, I think. So I've written 2 plays for that, and they're both produced in consecutive years. The first one was called Expulsion from Paradise, and it was essentially the short pitch is that it's Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden when they leave the Garden of Eden, except like they hate each other. I know, it's like such an interesting, like a weird premise, very like what? But it was super fun to write because I think I was kind of inspired by this idea that a lot of like kind of important or significant like figures throughout history, you can pull from like in this case like the Bible, or like in other cases like Greek mythology, Egyptian mythology, a lot of these other kind of canons. There are these figures that kind of last through the ages. I mean, there have been so many remakes of like Adam and Eve doing stuff, just look at movies. And I was also taking art history at the time, where you see literally the progression of the depiction of these 2 people, and also kind of like how the ideas of like sin and like judgment and agency are kind of explored through different time periods because of the social movements and the social attitudes of those times. So I was like, that's super cool. How would that look like in modern day? When we're kind of talking about, and I was specifically really interested in the idea of kind of taking this story that's kind of can be interpreted as being about like original sin, or like original like, I don't like the mistakes that like women make that like affected the rest of history. Like some people read it like that. And, taking that and all that's kind of affected throughout history, and kind of making it not so much about like women's mistakes and like how we were doomed in history because of that, but turning that into a story about like women's agency and women like seizing their fates. Because what happens in my play is that essentially Eve is like, you know what, like I'm really bored and I want to like create my own life and like get away from this annoying guy who like has a literal throne that he drags around because he just likes to sit on it and be cool and powerful and talk to animals, like what? And she's like, I'm leaving, and he's like, okay, I'll go along too. And it's kind of about, it's real weird, but it's about them kind of learning about themselves and each other, actually literally by talking to like different variations of themselves, a little bit like a Christmas Carol, but like different, if you could talk to different iterations of yourself, different future selves that you could be. And it's a lot about kind of just navigating the world and kind of seeing that as a person, like you're full of these different selves, like you're not just one thing. The second play that I wrote that was in 11th grade and had produced that year was called Alex is Not Dead. And that one was also inspired, it was actually inspired by like real events. So I was like just reading The Atlantic, because why not? And I saw this really interesting story about in Japan, there's this company, and essentially so it's this company and there are these actors that work for the company, and you can like hire an actor or actors to play different roles in your life. So yeah, so like for example, they interviewed people who were saying like, oh, my mother died and I'm really depressed about it, so I wanted to ask someone to play the role of my mother. Or like there's like something about like a child who like wanted to get admitted to a prestigious kindergarten, but they were really wanted children who had both of their parents for some reason, that they were just kind of getting pushed back because she only had like one parent. So then they like hired someone to play the other parent, you know. So kind of things like that. And yeah, so it's coming to Japan. And I was kind of reading this and thinking, you know, that's super interesting. I mean, I think when I talk to people about it, when they're like, what inspired your play? They're like, what? Like, that's a real thing? Who? Like, that's so, like, what? And I'm like, yeah, okay, like, sure, maybe it's like not something you've ever heard of, right? But, you know, something I was really interested in exploring, and which I do explore in the play, is not just like, oh, like, why is this such a weird idea? Because, like, okay, it might seem strange to you, but there's, you know, this company is succeeding. Like, there's a reason why this idea of being able to kind of replace people who are important to you in your life, or to kind of replicate like a relationship that you might have lost. Like, there's a reason why that appeals to people. So I kind of, and that was sort of like the idea in which I was working. I was like, I want to explore how our relationships with each other work, and kind of these expectations that we have for each other. Because something really interesting that I read is that people for this company, they can kind of ask their actors, they can say like, oh, like, I want you to be really funny, or like, I don't want you to yell, stuff like that. And I thought, you know, it's like, we're looking at this through through a company, but that, you know, I feel like on a larger scale outside this company, I feel like people also do kind of have those like checklists, like, you know, you're like, oh, you know, I want a really funny friend, or like, I want a really sweet like parent or something. So I was like, I want to kind of explore those expectations that we have for each other, and the stuff that we demand from each other. So it essentially follows this guy, he's like a teenager, and he works for this company. And this mother who lost her son in a car crash, actually as he was going off to college, which is weird because I'm going off to college. But yeah, that's why I was like, who? But so she lost her son when he was being driven off to college, actually by his dad, who died in the same car crash. So she lost like both of them at once, and she was really distraught about it. And so she went to these companies to basically rent like a son and a husband to replace the ones that she had lost. So it's sort of told, and then you meet like the son, and you follow from the son's point of view. So he's kind of learning this as it's unfolding, and he's talking to like this like rented dad, and they're kind of forming camaraderie about this. But what happens is that, you know, this like kind of fake family, they all start kind of caring about each other like genuinely, but because of all the baggage they're carrying around, like, you know, she's like, the mother, there's this moment where she's like, hey, like, you can't drink that drink, like, you're allergic to pomegranates. And while that might just seem like, well, that's kind of weird, like, it's almost like she's kind of trapped in the past, and she's like, you know, really wants her son to just be perfect. And it was kind of, the whole thing kind of explores how they're, you know, caring for each other more, but how they're also being held back by the expectations that they have for each other. You know, like, oh, I want you to be the perfect son. You know, he says, you know, she wants me to be her dead son, come back to life, but like, if I break out of that, will she care about me as I am? Not just the person that she wants to see, or that, you know, she wants to be real. And without spoiling it, you know, they kind of come to, you know, it's sort of about, they realize that it's a little bit about kind of being able to move on, you know, knowing that there are these people, these expectations that you have, these like perfect images of like a perfect like son or a perfect parent, but that people aren't really like that, but that there's still value in kind of reaching out and forming relationships with people.